All right, everyone, we are live. Give it 1 second here. I will let people go in. Tyler, how you doing? Give it a moment. People are coming, but how you doing today?
Good, man. Good. How about you?
Doing really good. Let me get the chat going up here, and it just takes a minute. So before we kick this off, as we're on here, we're just waiting a few minutes to get people coming in. We'll start seeing visitors pop on, and then once we get some comments in the chat going, we'll kick this right off. So one thing, Tyler, you're it's go time. We got Brooke. She's seen it live. So you're where are you at right now, Minnesota, man?
Minneapolis proper.
Minneapolis proper. So the weather that's been going on all over the place, just really quick while I wait for people to pop on. You guys aren't seeing any of that, are you?
Oh man, it's been terrible. So a couple of things. One, we've had 4 consecutive years of drought. It looks like we're finally out of it this year, but with that too, like a lot of places, unseasonably warm temperatures. So it's kind of thrown off the gardening. Trees are stressed, a lot of that other stuff. And then, I also get out your way usually once or twice a year to hit the Cascades a little bit. And I got to tell you, the warming that's been going on in the atmosphere has made Rainier a little bit of a tough cookie to solve the last few years as well.
Right. That's wow. So those tornadoes, have you seen those tornadoes that are going on then?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. Wild stuff.
It's wild, like to see, especially now that we can capture it all. Mm-hmm. It's like, I mean, I was listening to it, and it was like, they're beasts. Mother Nature is a force to be reckoned with.
Absolutely.
It is.
No joke.
All right. Well, we're getting some people coming in here. So I'm saying, let's give it one more minute. Everybody, when you start coming on, start popping where you're from in the chat. Hi, Tanya. We see you out there from Lafayette. How's Lafayette? Lafayette. So Tyler, do you see Tanya Boyd running around there on LinkedIn?
Yeah, a little bit here and there.
She's out in the swamp, man. She gets out in the swamp and does some swamp stuff. And I'll tell you what, she gets right up close to some stuff in the swamp. You're like, all right.
Yeah, well, I actually, my first duty station after my initial training in the Army was Fort Polk, Louisiana. So kind of on the western side of the state. So I think Tanya's a bit to the east of where I was at. But that was several years ago. And so, in fact, I was a Louisiana resident for, I think, about 6 years. A lot of those 6 years, I wasn't actually in Louisiana, but I was a resident.
Yeah. That's awesome. She's got all the alligators. Yeah, all the alligators, and she's doing good at taught. All right, well, hey, let's kick this off. So everybody, welcome to Project Revolution Live. This is our second episode, and we have Tyler Smoker. Correct? Smoker is the best way.
Yes, that's correct. And even if you said it wrong, I don't care.
I want to make sure Smoker, right? And so he's the founder and principal at Winsley, and you're also a Fortune 500 consultant. You've got a laundry list of awesome stuff you've done. You've done, security. You're a vet. Give us a little, insight really quick into what you are, what you've done and who you are real quick. Let the people know.
I suppose what I am depends on who you ask, and probably could vary from any given day. But so I'm a North Dakota farm kid, left for the Army 5 days after I graduated from high school. Ended up doing a 20+ year career between active duty, then National Guard, and eventually reserve. So that's kind of one of the unique elements of my career, is that, you hear about people transitioning from the military, and a lot of those folks, they'll do the full 20, retire, and then go out into the job market. So my transition was a little bit different, where I, in a sense, functioned in military roles for about the first 9 years of my career, making a full-time living off of it. And then I transitioned into paramilitary work. So I did some civilian embedded advisory work. I lived with a unit of the Afghan National Army. And so working as a civilian, helping them to function better as units. And so I split time doing that while I was also still in the National Guard, and then eventually pivoted into corporate security while I finished out my military career. And so when I was working for large private security firms, ended up getting into project management positions, and then eventually set up a global PMO for a large firm. And from there worked with a laundry list of the Fortune 500, and got to kind of look behind the curtain of a lot of different companies and glean a lot of different best practices from them, as well as, like any project experience, you're going to see those opportunities for improvement. So those are still good examples as well. Maybe it's the things not to do, but kind of gleaning all of that information. I eventually ended up in an infrastructure and operations vice president role, doing DevOps and software development and tier one integrations of tier one software integrations and enterprise projects for a security firm, but more I would say agnostic projects and not necessarily security tech all the time. And then some unique developments, ran offshore DevOps teams, near shore, onshore. And then, 6-7 months ago, I decided, well, let's get an LLC going and see if I can do some of the same stuff on my own. So here we are, and I'm doing a lot more selling now to get the revenue, but it's been good.
That's awesome. I mean, you've got some breadth and depth there.
Yeah.
Seriously. So this is good. So one of the things I was really interested is I've been following you on LinkedIn for a while, and you've got some really interesting LinkedIn posts going on. And it's like, and I read them and it's like, you got the disruptor. And so you were like the disruptor of security for 2023, right? LinkedIn voted LinkedIn disruptor of 2023.
Yeah. So as a commentator in the security industry, Harvard grad, very highly respected, but he does a best of list every year. And he ended up kind of catching some of my stuff as well. And we ended up having some back and forth. And he's like, dude, it's like, you are doing this way different than everyone else in the security industry. And so I'm coming from an industry that, from a social media perspective and information distribution and how they're running information campaigns and those types of things, very much still buttoned up. And I'm pushing some of those limits. And I had a simple thesis that, our industry could benefit in terms of talent acquisition as well as customer connectivity if we were able to get out of the backwater a little bit and able to get a little bit closer to the mainstream. So one of the things that I've prided myself on with my LinkedIn content isn't necessarily that I'm making a ton of friends in the security industry. Some of what I do is still an acquired taste in that space among the purists. But at the same time, it's like, guys, I'm getting folks who are not in the security industry to show up and see it. And granted, it's not super deep and academic a lot of the times, but it's kind of starting to give other folks within the community access to some of that information, at least at a superficial and maybe slightly beneath the surface level. And so, I kind of take pride in that as well. And it's like, kind of share your craft and share your trade with the community. And I think you'll start to see opportunities open up from that. So I've taken a little bit of an unconventional approach in doing that and tried to infuse storytelling and some of the same things that you're doing with project management, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's good, because when you look at it, there's a lot of, and I'm gonna say this lightly or loosely, but there's a lot of canned stuff on LinkedIn when you go on, and it's a lot of stuff that's that you can Google some things. When you start talking about posts about growth mindset, we can all read about growth mindset anywhere we go, and that's the people that really are shaking it up and really changing the dynamic of what we're doing on LinkedIn are the ones that are giving us insights, right? Because you got thought leaders, and you wrote a post about thought leaders recently, which was really good, by the way. Then you have your thought leadership, and then you have general commentary, thought leadership, and then insight. People who really are giving insight into stuff to cause a spark to get people to understand, well, do I need to know this? Is this something that's going to affect me versus stuff that we already know, and it might be like kind of cool. And I think that's what really draws my attention to your stuff, is that it gets me thinking about things.
Well, I think the other thing too is it's like starting to both pushing out and taking in data points and information that's cross-domain, because history repeats itself. And so we all get into our tunnel vision of, I'm a recruiter, or I'm a project manager, I'm a corporate security person, or I'm a lawyer, or whatever I am. And we all get tunnel vision. That's how we end up in these silos, right? Where the reality is there are best practices, strategies, techniques, all of these different things that we can glean from other industries and other professions and apply them into what we're doing. And in fact, I've even started to pull a lot from what a lot of economists are doing, like around population decline, And I went and I did the calculations and how that directly impacts the security industry in terms of like projections for workforce management and staffing projections and those types of things. And it's caused a little bit of a stir, even to the point of, Tyler, you can't be putting stuff out like that. It's misinformation. It's like, no, it's not. It's like the data points are there. I simply distilled it down proportionately to our industry. So it's got million and billion dollar companies thinking now, it's like, well, is the guy right or not? It's like, well, this is stuff that you all need to be thinking about. And so I think that it's important. Of course, we need to be responsible about our sources and when we're pushing out information, but it's like, this is stuff that needs to be in the zeitgeist and get the industry kind of improving and iterating and provide and getting those enhancements going so that it's going to be resilient, you know, in the next 10, 15, 20 years, whereas the last 20-year model isn't going to work anymore with less people. And that's just kind of an example, right?
Yeah, now this is interesting. So that's kind of where we wanted to go with this conversation was, you know, how leadership actually works. Like, how do things actually happen in our industries, you know, versus like the cookie cutter stuff? Because you got the cookie cutter, and then you have how actually things work. And given your background, and in my background in project management, and your background with the military, you know, for me, I'm really, really excited to have some conversations around how leadership's developed in, you know, in your world, your history through your military, and how that actually transcribes over to times of crisis and then into projects. I want to talk projects a bit with you. So what, in your opinion, how does leadership actually work?
So leadership is an art and it's very nuanced, but then there's also systematic structures that can help you facilitate that in terms of how you're communicating, how you're implementing, how you're executing on target, executing on tasks, whether it's projects or missions or operations. So in the Army, one of the unique aspects was that, you know, we had a couple layers of guidance that we were given up front. So it's not like, here's a uniform, go do your worst, and hopefully it turns out for you. Right. So in the Army, you're dealing in terms of doctrine, and that's very much at like a geopolitical level. It's like, these are the doctrinal things that we do as a military or different types of units and positions there within. And it goes into, I won't say excruciating detail, but it goes into deep detail, right? And so you have the doctrinal level, then down a level from that, you have strategy, right? And so strategy is stuff that's happening 3 to 6 months out or sometimes a year out. And I always like to say that if you have leaders that are talking about strategy every day, you don't really have a strategy. You're talking about tactics. If you're talking about strategy every day or every week, you don't really have a strategy, or at least a good one. So that's kind of your longer term target below the doctrine level, where you kind of get into the specific scopes of a project or a mission, where you're applying that generic doctrine down to your strategy or your strategic level. Then now, down from that, you have where you're at your organizational or operational level of operations. And so that's where you're moving hundreds of people. It's like, we need to do these things to practically plan for, scope, implement, execute, iterate, enhance, right? And then build that momentum throughout the duration of the mission or the project. And then at the lowest level, you have tactics. And those are the things where leaders have to make decisions based on the ground truth. It's like, so, you know, a saying in the military, and I don't remember where it comes from, but every plan falls apart on first contact, right? And or the Mike Tyson saying is, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Yeah.
And so that's one of those things where you've gone through the effort, you've pre-scoped this project, you know, you won the RFP, now you're in there pre-kickoff with the client and you're getting ready to go into kickoff. And then they say, oh, by the way, we have this other thing. Or there's two stakeholders on your client counterpart team for the project implementation that hate each other. And so now they have competing interests. And so they're trying to leverage you to get their bit out of the project more so than the other. And so those are all those like real ground truth leadership things that happen at the tactical level, where you need to fuse information. And it's less important what the plan is at that point, and it's more important that you can plan so that you can adjust fire, in a sense, to adapt based on the ground truth, right?
That's powerful. So one thing, when you get into like the agile mindset, and people, when they talk about agile versus predictive and all these, you know, fun terms in project management, One of the things about it was that, in a perfect world, people like to plan and they like to stay with the plan. And if it's not going according to the plan, they can't actually get out of their own heads to be able to continue work. And to be truly, and I want to say agile, but we all know that the minute that you launch something, the plan is pretty much gone. You have a strategy, you know where you need to go, you know the objective and the targets you're trying to hit, right? But your step-by-step operations plan, there's going to be things that come at you, and how you react to that is really important. And so the agilists were trying to say that. They were trying to say, hey, we make these big plans, but yet when we get into boots on the ground and we start going after it, things change. And then we have to be able to have the resilience to be able to change. Well, some methodologies are just then allow them to just be in a constant state of flux, right? And so they don't actually ever hit their goals or continue their strategy. Their strategy gets washed away, and then they're reactive and they're, blinders, and then they end up getting eaten alive. So by having a good strategy and then teaching your team to be resilient and then be able to be adaptable in the moment, but always be talking about that strategy and where we're going and how we're going to get there. That's powerful. That's the way that we're able to get more done and be really efficient in a projectized environment. So it's interesting that you said that, because a lot of people are either one side of the fence or the other when it comes to, your tiers that you were talking there.
Well, I mean, in essence, if you think about like DevOps methodology or Kanban or Agile or, the different flavors of bucketed project management in your columns, I mean, they came to be out of necessity that there were some limitations with fixed waterfall project management. And, otherwise you're going to be monkeying around with Gantt charts forever. And it's like, this isn't really a fixed project, right? It's iterative.
I see. I worked in in a major corporation, right? And their whole job model, like their whole business model, was to be the business that could do anything that nobody else wanted to do. The most complex thing, we could do it and bring it to us. And that meant that everything itself was not repeatable, right? So it wasn't like an operational, we could put it into ops and just rinse, wash, and repeat. It was never like that. But they use that terminology all the time. So their mindset was that we are repeatable, we are a job shop, but we can do repeatable product, but nothing was repeatable. And they ran that waterfall type project management. And they couldn't figure out why everything was upside down and on fire, and they couldn't get it done. And they were causing a lot of crisis, like with their teams and stuff, and like unrest, and then they would be like, it was all about the Gantt chart. The Gantt chart says this thing has to happen, do the thing, losing money, bleeding money out everywhere.
Yeah. And PM's turning over every 6 months.
And it's like, what is the problem here? What are we doing wrong? And it's like, you didn't understand the simple fundamentals of how to plan and execute.
That's exactly right.
And it's crazy to me that a lot of businesses are like that. And
well, where it falls, Jeremiah, and we talked about this, before when we were, talking about having this discussion. It's that there's a common misnomer or a misunderstanding what project management is. And I'm an operations person myself as well, but I regularly have to remind operations people, especially when they start saying, "Oh, it's project management. I project manage out of convenience." It's like, yeah, but you can't even tell me what the methodologies are, much less in depth. What are the practical steps that makes these methodologies so important? So I think you end up in instances where you have operations people posing as project management people and not really defining that distinction. And even if it's iterative projects and you're an agile organization or like software projects, if you're supporting a tier 1 application, like that's a project that basically goes on for a 10 or 15 year life cycle, but it is still project management. And there's a level of rigor that comes along with that that's different than generalized business operations. And I think that that's missed a lot.
Can you go deeper on that?
So I would say, for example, you have operations people. I'll use an example from the security industry, right? So I worked in large organizations where I was part of a global strategic accounts team, right? And so we had implementation projects. In our industry, we called them startups or transitions, but basically it was like a service implementation project. So post-award, we won an RFP. $10 million project, $20 million project. You're going to be transitioning. You're going to be hiring a lot of FTEs. You're going to be getting aligned with your client as far as setup for access, for user credentials, for a lot of these different things, changing uniforms to get a workforce in place. A lot of these licensure, a lot of these different things that need to happen within a regulated environment, right? And so I saw that as these things were happening, it was discussed as though it was like a 50-50 proposition. A lot of the times it's like, well, hopefully we pull this off. And then during these projects, what would happen is, there would be some sort of a weak Gantt that wasn't even really a Gantt, and sometimes just a list. So not even like basic waterfall, which a project like that does reasonably fall into the realm of like a agile type, or excuse me, a waterfall scope. And then you're probably doing some more agile as like an iterative,
hybrid,
yeah, fragile projects. So you're using pure agile for implementation. And then after go live, you're kind of in like an agile where you're doing 90-day control plan or something like that. So you're pivoting, right? But so it astounded me. It's like, why is this such a circus all the time? Because I'd come from the military, and more specifically, I'd come from a career in the engineering regiments where, I had officers that were professional engineers by trade. So they actually did project management. And so the types of units that I was in the military, because I was a combat engineer by trade, we actually used proper project management, where most of the military and the Army was focused around more operations because it suited them. But see, we had a combination of, we were running missions, but we were also running projects. And a lot of times we were running projects during missions. So projects executed in combat zones during active missions, right? So I think that's where I probably benefited from that distinction of what the true differences were between operations and operations management and project management. So going back to that security industry example, then it's like, this doesn't have to be this hard, guys. I literally took traditional waterfall project management, built out an interactive Gantt, and something that was, I figured out all the formulations for staffing and all these other things so that, Google shared doc, and then
resources.
Yeah. And put the instructions on it so that, local level contributors could add their numbers or their metrics. I'd send out all the reminders and stuff like that. And pretty soon leadership is like, what did you do here? It's like, we weren't having to send people out on planes to go out to a client site for 2 months because the client got ticked off because we botched a transition or we missed a go live date. And so with that, a lot of that profitability loss went away. I will say that it was such a departure for organization when I implemented this that I got a lot of pushback from folks in the field. Well, Tyler, this isn't the way we've always done it. It's like, you have to trust me on this, guys. It's like, this is how projects and how implementations work, and you'll see. And over time, it got to a point where they just had an expectation for those things, and things ran so much smoother. And not only that, but then you have people that are starting to talk in terms of project management. And that's pretty powerful, that you have frontline managers that are part of like a multinational project saying, hey, Tyler, can you send me a copy of that Gantt chart? Or, hey, I was looking at the Gantt, I was looking at that state. Is this hard and fast? It's like, yep. And they were starting to look at those things. And that's really powerful.
Because they could believe in them.
Well, right. Exactly. And if there were things that were getting adjusted, they knew the lines of escalation. And me as the PM on these projects, like if we had to float something to the right because of supply chain or whatever within the Gantt and the project schedule, I would say, okay, I'm tracking on that. And I would move those things. So everyone knew I was going to take care of those things. And then eventually we started to scale that and train other PMs to do those same things. And it really is a powerful methodology. And like I always say, project management's life. You can stack project management on top of virtually any problem and solve it.
I think I just found somebody who loves project management as much as I do.
I do love it. I do love
like,
it.
You just was like, boom, I'm just sitting here like, I'm probably glowing because I'm like, that's rad. So you've seen some, you've been in some pretty like, I want to say hardcore areas, but really like even in your, let me look here. I just want to say unfriendly situations, right? In your
non-permissive operating environments is the PC term.
There you go. Now you've seen chaos in the work environment.
Mm-hmm.
and you've seen chaos in, in your military career.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any distinction between, have you seen people react in your project life or your, VP life that acts similar to how people would act under fire in, your military career? Have you seen a correlation there?
You get a little bit. I would say, as far as like ground tactical operations, like in a military or a combat environment, as things start cracking, that's a little bit different.
Yeah, you can't really. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of apples and oranges, but I will say that definitely mission planning and lead up to
Mhm.
operations, they're virtual parallels, to be honest with you. And so what you're going through initially with requirements gathering and scoping and solidifying your plan, whether it's an op order or an operations plan, or it's a scope for a project, getting ready to go into the briefings, pre-kickoff, you're going into kickoff, then your execution or start point. I mean, there are so many parallels between the two. And so in some cases, it's really just different jargon. But then again, the extension of that is similarly to where like project managers have, if you're looking at agile and you have your daily stand-ups, or you do your weekly or biweekly backlog grooming, whatever your frequency is, if you're running an agile project, similar things happen within military operations. So some of the terminologies would be a commander's update brief, a cub, or a bottoms up brief, a bub. And it's
Mhm.
basically
Yep.
where key leaders within these organizations would say, this is what I've got going on. Here's the last 24. Here's the next 24. Here's the next 48. And here's the next 90. Right. So,
Powerful.
yeah.
Yep. That's crazy. So, when you start thinking about it, some of the best tactics I've learned is by, so I haven't been in the military, but I've studied it. I come from a family of military, right? And I've
Mm-hmm.
studied, so I, my dad and my uncles and everybody, they're all like, they're Marines and Army. They've done it. And Air Force
Mm-hmm.
and Navy. So, they really installed some really good, some good character traits in me, and, helping me throughout my life. But when I really got into project management, I actually got into some jobs. So I've worked not in the military, but I've worked with the military. I've actually worked
Mm-hmm.
with, Navy and Army Corps of Engineers, and installing some pretty crazy products. I've worked on mission critical projects and
Mm-hmm.
things of those natures. I'm hanging out with generals and people are coming in, and we're in the weeds. But I started leveraging a lot of these different tactics like MRT when you talk about resilience.
Mm-hmm.
And so some people, they I believe crisis reveals your character. And when you get in the weeds with people on a project world, in the project environment, you see them crush and crumble, and they have to split, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, if I can start researching, different military tactics, I wonder if that can help people in project management. And I dove deep into MRT, and honestly, man, it's what it does for the military, I'm sure, is phenomenal. But what it's done for project management and the people I've trained with it has been incredible. And a couple of tactics were like, when people start getting under pressure and they're, because we have those instances where they do the plan and they're being tugged on their own values of who they are as a person and what they're going to do, and they
Mm-hmm.
haven't yet come up with, how they want to interact in the world, and they think they have a plan, but it's not the right plan, so they start catastrophizing on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Started working on like icebergs. And one of the things that they talked about in the MRT was icebergs, and how you can, what's on the surface is different than what's below. And you can start pulling on those values and thinking about thinking traps.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm literally drawing this stuff on a whiteboards for people, after a meltdown, we did like, they having a meltdown, and I'm like, you got to start, doing these analysis, and then think about these thinking traps, and then tied that back into real-time resilience.
Mm-hmm.
And those tactics were really powerful for project managers. Now, are these stuff that you've leveraged in your career and taught people, or is it just stuff in the military that they just taught you and maybe it went by the wayside? Do you guys leverage any of that?
So, I mean, I've definitely participated in MRT. I would say the times when I was going through MRT, it was still fairly early. And I think that they've continued to refine that program as well. But definitely there's some stuff there as far as like, gleaning from like sports psychologists and those types of things. And of course, I've had sessions with sports psychologists and in the military as well, where they brought in these SMEs to talk to us about this. And it was around staff operations, right? So it wasn't about busting through doors or anything like that, but it's managing high intensity conflict when you haven't slept for 48 hours. You're trying to take in communications, make decisions, getting it to commanders for decisions, and then executing upon those things with no sleep and those types of things. So definitely that falls into the realm of resiliency as well. And then the other thing too that you can't really overlook with the military is, on top of resiliency as a mindset, it's also the matter of repetitions. It takes 10,000 repetitions to master a movement, right? Or that's kind of the theory. So
The theory.
That's why we spend a bunch of money on taxes, so that the military can train a lot more than they fight, right?
Get their reps in, build them
Yeah,
up.
you get the reps in, because what that does then, and what you were referring to at the iceberg, I sometimes call the adversity snowball, or it's one of those things where it's like, I'd spent some time in the intelligence community as well, or working with intelligence and supporting some of those folks, is that you have the situations where you're overcome by events, or OBE, right? Mm-hmm. And so what happens is, if you're an untrained person and you're in a novel or new situation, it's not going to be hard to be overcome by events, or OBE, right? So you have a wide vector of things that can throw you off course and start to make you fall apart and crumble. But through those repetitions between getting the training, getting the knowledge, having effective leadership, and then also that resiliency mindset that comes along with those repetitions, your OBE vector gets really skinny, right? So it's like, it's not that I can't get overcome by events anymore. I was in the Army for 20 years. Yeah, but at the same time, it's going to take a lot more to get into my OBE zone than it is someone who's untrained, right? So that's what you're doing. So, we were talking a little bit about Mark Twight before we jumped on, and how it's about callousing your mind. And it's that same thing. It's like, it's preparing yourself through the repetitions, through information, through effective leadership, so that you're going to be less likely to be OBE or overcome by events. And so as people start to fall out and freak out, you're the person that you're shrugging it off the sides, because your OBE vector to get compromised is razor thin. Not that it can't happen, but it's razor thin.
So I'm going to spend the rest of my life training my OBE.
That's
I love
it.
that. Shrink it. So that's so how would you, when you talk about resilience and crisis and leadership, right? And what about when you're boots on the ground, and you were saying these things start cracking, what kicks in there for you?
So troop leading procedures comes in. I'm not going to go through the whole list of it, but it's essentially, troop leading procedures is like a very distilled version of project management life cycle. From receiving a potential for a project, to making your initial movements, to giving a warning order to your people, starting to move assets around, coming up with a tentative plan, finalizing your plan, and then executing on target. So these are these types of things that, again, you get indoctrinated with this from the time you get into basic training. And I'll say this then too, just to how important the leadership component is. When I got to basic training, it kind of threw me off how much, like, the drill instructors, and I was a kid making $800 and off the family farm, and I'm a nobody, right, in the Army. And it's a bunch of high school graduates or whatever, but they're talking about, you guys are leaders, you have to start practicing your leadership. And the Army values is actually the acronym leadership, right? And so they were doing that to get you to start thinking about planning for these types of extraordinary events as though you're going to have to call the shots. So they indoctrinate you and inoculate you from the moment you get into the Army, that it's like, everyone else might be dead and it might be you calling the shots. So when you go into it, and then going into training events, knowing that they might say, all right, you're in charge now, everyone knows that their ticket can get punched at any time to be calling the shots. No one wants to fall out or fall apart in front of their peers. No one wants to look like an idiot. So because of that, everyone is really focusing on making sure they know the plan. They're not just sitting there with the north-south. Yeah. I know what's going on.
They know it. They know it.
Yeah,
inside.
because there might be a pop quiz and you might be the
Wow.
person that has to answer the questions for the rest of your team or your crew because, again, you have like continuity of leadership. And if you start with a unit of 100 people, if things go south and you're the lowest ranking person, eventually you're going to be the person in charge. You might be in charge of yourself at that point, but that's just how it works.
So why aren't we training teams like that now? I mean, that right there to me, you just changed the way I view it. Like you got to constantly be training all the way down the line because you never know if people are falling off. Your lowest rank is going to have to take the reins and drive you to freedom, right? Take you there.
So succession planning takes work, right? And it
Right.
takes time and it takes effort. And I think probably and I think some for-profit organizations are better at it than others. And I think particularly those that are a little bit more operational, like within the security industry, I would say we're pretty good about continuity planning and continuity of government in a sense, right? Just because of where people came from before they got there. And I think there are some other organizations that are probably okay at it as well. But the thing is, I think people get so focused on sales and profitability and all these other things. And so when you're planning for these types of things to a commercial entity, they're almost like a non-billable activity, right? And so it's hard to shift effort towards planning or planning and preparation that's not directly billable, right? Because if you look at hard times or austerity for any organization, what's the first thing to go when things get lean and things get hard? It's your cost centers, right? And so
Yeah.
that's kind of a cost center activity. And so those are the first things to get cut because it's all about profit and it's all about profit centers, right?
So I think, it goes back to, then we all know why, projects and businesses fail, right? Planning.
Yeah.
They don't plan properly. And then when
Right.
they do plan, they don't execute the plan. So the plan fails.
Yep. In a lot of cases, they don't gather requirements, right? So the
That's the
project,
biggest problem.
and so the plan is
But it,
doomed from the start
sorry.
because everyone wants to rock and roll and high five. We don't gather requirements, and then we get surprised so much that we can't amend our way out of it.
So that's funny. I again, I have to say this loosely because of the projects I were working on were pretty that security requirements. But mission critical project, we had to bring some people home. The job was to get in, get the work done, get it done right away, and get it kicked off, right? But the interesting side with that was that you had two sides of it. You had a product, you had people that we were serving that we had to bring home. And then we had a product we had to build that was a first of a kind, because the reason why we had to bring the people home was because there was something missing that we had to build. And so the engineers had to design it, and then we had to build it quickly and get it out to them. And because of that, there was the bid itself. I'm just choosing my words here. Give me a second. The bid itself, we could put a premium price, right? It could be a little bit more premium on it because of the expedited value of it. And so by doing that, once it landed at the table of everybody to build it, the organization was like, just go build it. Just go build the thing. Don't worry about any of the requirements. Well, what they did was you still had to meet some very stringent requirements because it did nobody any good if it didn't meet the engineering design, right?
Especially in military projects.
They were like, yes, you have to be on time. Yes, you have an expedited project, but it's still got to be right. So there's going to always be that little bit of, with the government stuff, there's going to be a little bit of like, if you're a couple days late because you did more planning up front and you got the requirements, you did that requirement extraction, there's a give and take there. But the business didn't allow for that. And so all of a sudden you end up running really quick, and they're pushing everybody saying, don't worry about the requirements. Just go build the product. This is what we do. And what ended up happening is that you get parts that are non-conforming and you can't deliver them. And then you completely, squash your name, and all kinds of things happen with that. But it's all because we decided we were for profit, only profit, requirements doesn't matter. And, project management, we'll figure it out in the end. That was the idea. But you've got paperwork and things like that matter so much more. And it always trips me up that people don't understand that from that front end perspective, that, hey, yes, profit's important. We have to do our best to do it. But if we plan more up front and we execute better, or if we plan more up front, detail plan it, and then have a way for being adaptable and how we communicate that, we're going to get into that steady state and be able to bring the back end in. Most companies don't see it from that standpoint. It's for profit, get busy, and then they destroy their teams and their name in the process of doing it.
Well, a lot of that, and then also when you have junior leaders or sponsors who are involved in the project who don't really have a full understanding for compartmentalization and how
Right.
that works, and they don't necessarily need to know everything upstream and downstream, but they should have an appreciation for at least the thing that's happening immediately upstream to them and the thing that's happening immediately downstream from them functionally to the extent that they can. But again, with classifications and those types of things on some of these types of projects, you can't have it. So when it means that we have to have something that fits in a box this big and it can't weigh more than this, you don't know if it's because it has to go onto a plane, and if it can't do that, then you can't meet the requirement of the mission anyway. And so those are the types of things where you get leaders who it's like, well, yeah, let's just get her done and we'll get it done and whatever else. It's like, yeah, but if you can't get thing X on plane Y to get to location Z to do the thing that the client needs it to do, then it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't meet the intent. And that's, again,
Right.
when they talk about projects that fail, they say, a big study happened with this, and it was like, like 16% of all projects fail. 53 of them were challenged, right? But in that 16% that failed, the way that they deemed it fails, they did not meet the intent. They actually built it and shipped it, just didn't meet the intent. So it didn't work. And in the 53 that were challenged, it was like over budget, over schedule, didn't have the right requirements, basically shipped a polished turd to them.
Right.
Right. And you lose client satisfaction. So it's interesting to me that when we talk about, proper leadership, right? So for what leadership really is in a projectized world, you and I mentioned this before, and this is brilliant. When you hire project managers, if you do this right and you bring on good senior technical project managers, you're actually getting, executive level, strategic executive level employees.
Right.
And the thing about that is if you do it right, when you have a mission and a vision and the executives, literally transfer that to a project manager, that project manager takes that and they're now responsible for all the people downstream of them, right? Actually, they're allies, right? On the horizontal. And then they're straight down. They actually communicate that and they're like your champion. So you have the leaders, you have a manager, and you have a follower.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to, and at times of leading, that's the communication. That's all the verbal. When you talk about the strategy, being able to come up with the strategy, get people on board with it, understand the vision, cast the vision, then tactically, and then also be able, one thing about a leader that's really good is that they actually know how to use their resources, right? They're really resourceful. They know how to position those chess places, and they're all about that. That's part of the game. The next piece is when they go into their tactics, they have to manage at times. And that's really, to me, project management is the tactics.
Mm-hmm.
Project management itself is those are your tools and your methods and your methodologies that you leverage when you're down in there for your Scrum and your Agile, and you're literally using your sprints and your ceremonies and all those things to be able to communicate. That's the management piece. And you implement that, put that into place, and then you communicate through great leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then at times those same leaders have to step back and listen to what's going on around them so that they can not only better themselves, they can better the team and help the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see that. And I see that being a missing piece when I think about leadership. A lot of people they come up to me and it's like, what is leadership? And I'm like, it's empathy. It's emotional intelligence. And I'm like, it's so much more to great leadership.
Yeah,
it's like,
cool story.
like,
How'd your last project go? Probably as poorly as your next one will go.
yeah, it's like, it's like, that's like such a small sliver of just being able to understand a person, and leadership is the empathy part. But you got conflict resolution. You have you have to be there's so many levels to you. I look at leadership as in situational. It's like you have to be the person people need in the moment when you step into a room, and you never know what you're going to get. And sometimes you have to go in, you have to be commanding. You have to go into the room and look around and say, this shit is not going to fly no more. This is what we're doing right now is not going to serve us, you, or anybody. Right. And we have to pull it back. And that's the only way that you can get the point across. And other times you have to be a little bit more supporting. You have to be like, hey, let me help you out. And then a lot of times we have to be pace setters, but we have to know like, what is the volume that people can handle, the capacity that they can handle of that. And then how do I strategically place my best, chess pieces in the right area to be able to maintain that pace over time.
Right.
And that's a strategy on leadership. Right.
Right.
And I noticed that a lot of people, they think it's empathy. That's it. And I mean, I hear that time and time again. And so when I,
Yeah, but it's not. I mean, you actually have to know how to do stuff to lead people.
that's
You
the
can't
trick.
just be a nice guy or a nice gal. That's just not how the world really works. And the higher risk and severity profile of projects, or the higher criticality of projects, just being a nice guy or a nice gal isn't enough.
How would that work in the military?
Well, exactly. I mean, but the thing is, in the military too, like, you have like movies and pop culture and stuff. It's just everyone's barking orders and, knife hand and all this other stuff. And it's not really like that. I mean,
No.
you're a conscientious leader, but you're also picking your spots, because there are going to be times that you're going to have to push young men and young women to go farther than they thought possible when
Yep.
they're having the worst days of their lives. So you need to be on point, and it needs to go beyond, well, yeah, just tell me how you really feel. I mean, you need to have a true understanding for the project. You need to have lived that yourself and been forged in fire yourself, so that you're able to triage those situations, because some people are going to fall apart, and you're going to have to move people around based on that. And then you're constantly assessing the atmospherics and all of the things that you don't have direct control over within that project, whether you have executive sponsor who's pissed off at procurement, right? Because that can happen. And then you're trying to deconflict between them when you already have a complex project that you have to execute. And now you have two key stakeholders within the organization who are beefing and adding complexity onto the project, and they're supposed to be the client. So there are all these nuances associated with that, where you really need to view the atmospherics, decide when to push people, when to pull back, when to give people a breather, those types of things.
So that's an interesting question. So how do you get somebody to be their best when they're at their worst? Right? What kind of tips would you give somebody to say, hey, these people are that you can see they're all completely down and you need to get the best out of them? What do you do?
One of the things I like to do, and I mean, it depends on how much time you have, or what level of urgency there is. I mean, because in some situations you're going to have a level of urgency where it's like, all right, dad is stepping in and I'm going to call the shots, because
Yeah.
the
Commander.
project still needs to get done. I'm going to roll up my
Commander.
yeah, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to put some old man strength on it, right? But
Yep.
then there are other times where projects aren't quite as critical, because every project isn't critical, or it's not in a critical phase, or it's not a critical mass where you're out of time, or the project's in jeopardy. So take those opportunities where you have that, where it's maybe not your A players or yourself, but maybe you're putting these people into the projects, like giving them the decision points so they can start to get those reps as well. Because what happens is, if you have a team and you're only playing your starters because they're the best in the league, but your bench sucks, you're still not a championship team, right?
Right.
So you're moving players in, you're leveraging your preseason, you're leveraging those games where you're 30 points ahead to bring in some of your bench players to get some playing time, so that as people turn, as people get traded, as people retire, whatever that is, you start to fold those folks in, so that you're building your operational capacity, not just off the top 20% of your organization, but also across the bottom 80% of it, so that you're elevating the entire organization in the process. And when you do that, you're not just increasing the capacity of your top 10%, you're increasing your capacity of the entire organization. And I think by doing that, that's how you're forging people in less hot fires, so that when things do start cracking and they get serious, you have people that are really knowledgeable and they're self-starting.
That's, you said one thing a while back. You said you first have to have been there before you can, essentially you said you have to have it within you before you can give it, right?
Yep.
You have to possess those qualities and have lived there and been forged in that fire before you can actually, train other people to do that. And I believe that there's really those four levels of leadership. You have, first you have yourself. If you're not inspired, you're not going to inspire other people. If you don't have those qualities, you can't give them to others, right? You don't have any room to do that. If you're not confident, you can't install confidence in other people. Then that's where it goes one-to-one, where you're working one-to-one to people. You get good at just being able to understand and that people and be able to communicate with them effectively. Then you have one-to-many. You're a big leader. You can really cast that vision to them. And then you have legendary stuff where, like, your commanders or the people, that you've worked with in your leadership. You'll still hear them resonating through you in your world, in your life, even though they're not there, and you'll act accordingly to those rules that are installed in you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so as we start learning how to become those leaders, that's, that's something that takes time, and you got to create frameworks and tactics. So I don't believe that leadership is just innate. A lot of people say, leadership's innate. You're either born with it or you don't have it. I believe it's taught and it's learned. And you, just like anything in life.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people probably just through some of their human characteristics, I mean, it comes a little bit more naturally too, but there's definitely
For sure.
there's definitely tangible skill sets that come along with it. And I think this kind of goes back to the point we were talking about a little bit earlier. I've had brilliant operations people who absolutely botch projects because they didn't understand what project management was. And they assume, well, I've always been a rock star in this thing that I do. So yeah, I manage projects. It's like, yeah, but do you manage projects, right?
Right.
So it's one of those things where you have to have the methodology. You have to have some background information to be able to do those things. It's like, it would be equivalent to if you're running military operations on no intelligence. You know what happens when that happens? You end up getting massacred. Like you have to have
You
intelligence
got to have data.
and some context to the project, to the operating environment before you ever get there, so you can start to inform your people, so you can start to train your people, so you can start to equip your people, and you can get your people those repetitions so that they're not going into a disastrous blind date,
Right.
and they don't know what to do. It's like they've got an idea of what they're getting into beforehand. And granted, there's going to be some externalities and some things that come up that are, unanticipated. But again, same thing as with the individual. With that mission set, you're narrowing that OBE down by planning and mitigating for as much as you can.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. Again, when you talk about, the tactics in military and how they easily correlate with project management. It's so easy, that I see so many comparisons one-to-one with them. Really quick. So Tanya put up here, you've heard a lot about emotional intelligence from her lately. So she's worked with a guy who's released a book on emotional intelligence. And Tanya, I have not read it, but I will. And the thing about emotional intelligence, a lot of people, when you say emotional intelligence, they think, oh, this is, and I'm going to say empathy again, because like a lot of people tell me that they're like, oh, it's empathy. But really what emotional intelligence is they came up with 4 quadrants to really be able to, you can build, a lot of resilience. If you go back to MRT and stuff they teach in the military, the very first thing they teach is you have to have self-awareness. You have to have self-regulation, right? You have to have control. They talk about mental agility. You have to have mental agility, and you have to be optimist. You have to have a positive outlook. And those things right there. And then you have to have character strength. There's a bit of character behind the leadership in some of these different methodologies. And when you get into what they talk about with emotional intelligence from the construct of, like Daniel Goleman, he created 12 basic competencies that you could learn. And if you did that, it takes your leadership to the next level. And when you talk about, leadership here and then project management here, it actually helps you within that project management world, because you have to learn the processes and stuff behind that. But it gives you the self-regulation, the self-awareness, the self-regulation, then the social awareness to be able to actually have conflict resolution and to be able to have empathy to understand a person. Because if you don't understand them, obviously that's a problem. You're never going to get very far. You have a problem. It'll be a hard life. And then they give you all these other characteristics that you have to learn from a relationship building that ties right into the communication aspect that you need to be a great leader. And so I think that there's a lot of conceptions about what that means, but the power of that construct right there, those 12 steps plus project management, when you bring them together, that is one of the most powerful systems you can ever have in your life if you understand it at the simplest level. Like you can do amazing shit with that.
Sounds a lot like change management, right? When you can
Yeah.
bring change management and project management together, and you have a decent, executive sponsor, the probability of success of a project goes up significantly, because you have emotional buy-in to the project, you have the skill set through project management, and you have the IQ and the EQ, plus you have buy-in of the organization. Those are projects that win.
Now that right there is one of the biggest things that we talk about with Project Revolution, is that balance between IQ and EQ.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fine balance there, right? I believe there's a level of intelligence you have to have. You have to have that competency, that depth, and that breadth, but you also have to have that EQ. And so, like you said, the way you said that with change management, I also believe that we are risk managers in every single thing that we do.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Absolutely. You're always running you're always running risk assessment, and you're applying control measures to to mitigate risk to within an acceptable level. And that's something that the military was very good at. We didn't do anything without a risk assessment, whether it was a live operation, whether it was a training mission, whatever. We're doing risk assessments to go out and do a road march, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's like someone could get bit by a snake. What's our evac plan? Do we have an ambulance? Like there's all of these things that, you know, it seems like minutia, but it's what separates great organizations from the rest.
That's true. And that is a fact. And when you also mentioned something, I mean, you said so many good things here. This is a lesson right here.
I was going to say the same thing to you, by the way.
Thank you for this. One of the things that was really, you talked about, you have to have feedback, you have to have optics, right? I believe that every decision that we make, every strategy we create, everything that we do comes back in a form of numbers. It comes back in intelligence. And if you don't have that intelligence, it's like you're driving down the road blind. You got in your car, you can't see, and you're just driving to see what happens. And like you said, it's chaotic, right? And that's another thing. You hear people talk about KPIs. You hear people talk about how to measure, but they actually know what to measure that matters. And that's it. And I have a
or do they just want a pretty dashboard to look at quarterly, right?
Yeah, like you've heard of watermelon projects, right? Where it's like it's green, it's green, it's green, it's green. You cut into the middle, you get to the middle, it's red. It died. What happened? And it's like you have that in organizations too. They mask their dollars, they hide their financials, especially in smaller businesses. You know, they don't want everybody knowing the financials. And I talked to a lot of project managers. They don't even have budgets, right? I'm surprised by the amount of PMs they're not responsible for P&L that I talk to. And I believe you've dealt with major programs, right?
Yeah, big P&Ls.
Yep. Same here. And so when it comes back to the finances, I think about, you know, you got all those different assets, but I cannot tell you of anybody that's really knowingly been able to set a strategy and hit a plan and hit their markers without having those stakes in the ground to be able to accurately see how they're performing and then pivot and change as needed. And it's the simplest concept that most people don't do. And financially, when you're talking about dollars, even.
Well, right. And I think that if you do an apples to apples comparison, you have a PM that has financial and P&L experience versus one that doesn't, but otherwise they're apples to apples on projects, you're going to see very distinct differences in decision making and how they're assessing risk, right? Because most likely that PM who understands financials understands the full implications of what constitutes a successful or unsuccessful project. Because maybe you got to go live and maybe you met requirements, but if you're completely upside down, was it really successful?
Right. Like what was the success measurement? You have to know that.
Right. We gave away free project management. That's not successful. Maybe it is for the client, but we can't do it again.
And so that begs another question that people are like, if all these projects are failing, why do we need project management?
That's why you need it more.
You need proper project management. And it's like that word, you know, project management to me is a word. I'm always trying to think of a better way to say it. Cause when you say it's got such a bad rap in some instances, people think it's like paper pushing. I hear that a lot. Like, oh, they're just admin, they're just paper, they're overhead costs, they're really expensive. You know,
or they just run calls. And what are they really doing here? It's like, I'm keeping you guys from OBEing yourself.
Yeah. And so like we talked about, you know, you get that executive level leader on the ground. So, hey, we're running out of time here. We're coming up to the end. This has been awesome. I wasn't sure where this was going to go, but I love where it went.
Yeah, me too, man.
So I'd love to do this again. So do you have anything any final wrap ups, any final thoughts?
No, just thanks for having me on. It's nice to be able to get on and geek out with some fellow PMs for once, and people are picking up what I'm putting down, and definitely learn some stuff. And thanks to everyone in the comments who's able to come out and hear this. You know, I appreciate you showing up, and let's go out into the world and do great things and manage some projects.
That was rocket. Yep. Everybody. So, you know, Tyler, you've got some services, right?
I do.
What you want to?
Yeah. So I do enterprise project and program management, as well as change management. I'm a former global PMO I've administered projects in over 50 countries. I work with all types of firms. I specialize in smaller to mid-sized firms, not so much on the Fortune 500s, but if someone called me, I guess I probably wouldn't turn it down. Like working with veteran-owned organizations, organizations that are also security inclined. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, obviously, and I also just launched my website and figured out how to do no-code websites. So
Nice.
www.winsleyllc.com. That's Ly, not Ley. So check out my website. It's nothing fancy, but it's got some particulars in there as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And check out his post, man. He's got some great content too, as well on LinkedIn. So if you guys haven't checked it out, check out Tyler, follow him, like him, get on there and have conversations. He's good at getting back to you and keeping conversations rolling and doing
Absolutely.
Rocky Championship with you. One other thing, you're a mountain climber, you love endurance. How important is endurance for project managers?
Oh my God. It falls into OBE. I would say applying project management when I picked up mountaineering as a hobby really kind of is what got me onto the project management as life, right? Philosophy, because I realized that it was powerful as a professional tool, as an organizational tool before. But then as a mid to late 30s, something I started climbing mountains, I was going through and planning and doing reconnaissance. I'm like, holy crap, I'm doing project management. Project management really is life. You can apply it to dang near anything.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for that, Tyler. And everybody, thanks for coming out. And again, I'm Jeremiah Hammond, Project Revolution. If you need project management training that rocks and you want to take your team to the next level, go to my feature section, follow me on LinkedIn, go in there, click on it. I've got all my trainings in there. Give me a call. Let's get together and make things rock. We really appreciate y'all coming out tonight. Thanks a lot. Hey, Tyler, stay capable, buddy.
That's it, baby.
It is. See ya. See y'all.